Why was the hangar so quiet? Even the tools seemed to be holding their breath. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Hendrickx wiped her hands on a rag blackened with grease and stared at the paper she just found wedged behind an engine panel. A yellow carbon copy shipping manifest, ordinary, harmless until you noticed the numbers. She lifted it to the light. The weights didn't match, the coordinates were wrong, and the destinations weren't real. For a moment she just stood there in the fluorescent glare, the sound of wind scraping against the hangar walls. It was late November in Cascade Falls, Montana, cold enough that her breath came out in ghosts. But there was something colder forming in her chest. Smuggling manifests, hidden routes through the Bitterroot National Forest. Someone was using Summit Aviation, her new civilian employer, to move contraband through remote flight paths. And that someone was her boss, Danny Castellano. She'd been a SEAL for 12 years before a shattered femur ended her service. She'd come home to Montana to heal, to disappear. But the universe had other plans for people like Sarah. Trouble had a way of finding warriors who refused to quit. She folded the manifest back into place, her pulse slowing to mission tempo. In the team's discovery wasn't the end, it was the beginning. You didn't act on suspicion. You gathered proof. You built the case brick by brick until there was no room for doubt. For the next week, Sarah lived a double life. By day, she was the quiet new mechanic, the woman who fixed helicopters faster than anyone else. By night, she became an investigator, photographing mismatched fuel logs, copying altered maintenance records, tracing unauthorized flight hours that aligned too neatly with smuggler routes across the Canadian border. Each clue painted the same picture. Danny Castellano wasn't just dirty. He was protected. The judge, the sheriff. Names her late father had once whispered about before his accident. But she wasn't ready to believe it yet. Not until the evidence spoke, loud enough to silence hope. It happened on a Thursday. Gray skies, bitter wind crawling down from the mountains. Sarah was reviewing weather reports when she heard his voice behind her. Sarah got a minute. Danny, 50-something, soft around the edges, the kind of man who'd built power from paperwork and favors. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Need you for a training flight tomorrow. Victor's bringing in a new contractor, Garrett Walsh. You'll show him the mountain routes, emergency landing zones, all the usual. She turned slowly, schooling her expression. Sure, what time? 0700. Oh, and bring your cold weather gear. Cold weather gear. Altitude. A 3-person flight. Her, a stranger, and Victor Reeves, Summit's head of security. Her instincts screamed. That familiar vibration in her chest, SEAL intuition, the sixth sense honed by near-death and bad missions, was telling her one thing. This wasn't a flight. It was an execution. She kept her face neutral. Got it, boss. He left whistling. And when the hangar door closed, Sarah finally exhaled. 12 hours to prepare. That night she drove through the snow to a warehouse on the outskirts of town. The sign read Fallen Riders MC, a motorcycle club built by veterans who refused to fade quietly into civilian life. Inside, laughter, cards, beer, the smell of oil and wood smoke. And at the door, a man who once led special operations teams long before Sarah earned her trident. Marcus Bull Patterson. He took one look at her face and knew this wasn't a social call. Talk to me, Doc. He still called her by her SEAL medic nickname. Sarah stepped inside. The chatter softened as men and women recognized the look in her eyes, the look of a soldier bringing bad news. In the back office, Bull shut the door and gestured to the same chair her father once sat in. Your dad came here 3 years ago, he said quietly, 2 weeks before his accident. Sarah froze. What did he tell you? Bull opened a drawer and produced a sealed envelope, yellowed and worn. Her father's handwriting on the front. For Sarah, if I'm not here to give this to you myself. Trust Bull. Her breath caught. Hands shaking, she unfolded the letter. Baby girl, it began. If you're reading this, I didn't manage to expose what I found in time. Danny Castellano is running weapons and contraband with protection from Judge Whitmore and Sheriff Braddock. The evidence is hidden where I taught you to shoot when you were 12. Trust Bull. Trust your training. Sometimes the uniform isn't enough. Sometimes you have to stand alone. I love you, Dad. She read it twice, the words cutting through her like winter wind. The place he taught her to shoot, Rattlesnake Gorge. A clearing only they knew. Her father hadn't fallen asleep at the wheel. He'd been silenced. He knew they'd kill him, Bull said softly. Tried to convince him to go federal, but he wanted ironclad proof. Old school soldier believed in finishing what he started. Sarah stared at the letter until the ink blurred. Then she looked up, voice steady. Tomorrow they're taking me on a training flight. Victor Reeves and some new pilot, Bitterroot Forest, 6,000 feet. Bull's eyes hardened. That's not training, that's cleanup. She nodded. I'll need extraction if I survive. Doc, he said after a long pause, that's insane. She gave a faint smile, so was Bud S. He huffed a laugh that wasn't quite humor. Diesel and Ghost will be watching the valley. If you live through that jump, they'll get you out. Sarah tucked her father's letter inside her jacket pocket, close to her heart. Then I guess I'd better not die. Back in her apartment, she prepared like it was mission night. Equipment first. A modified cold-weather jacket, unassuming on the outside, but lined with experimental drag panels she'd tested once during SEAL training. Not a parachute, not even close. But maybe, just maybe, enough to slow a fall from certain death to probably fatal. Then the evidence. She uploaded every photo, every manifest, to a secure cloud with a dead man switch. If she didn't log in every 24 hours, the files would auto-send to the FBI and an investigative journalist named Rebecca. Finally, the message. She set up her phone, hit record. Her reflection stared back, pale, tired, resolute. My name is Lieutenant Commander Sarah Hendrickx, United States Navy, retired, she said. If you're watching this, then Danny Castellano tried to kill me to protect a criminal network operating in Cascade County. The evidence of his crimes will already be in federal hands. Whatever happens next, don't let them bury this. 20 minutes later, the upload was complete. Sarah stepped onto her balcony. Cascade Falls glittered below, quiet and oblivious. She could almost hear her father's voice. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it. The river beneath tomorrow's flight path would be near freezing. Impact would be like hitting concrete. Unless the jacket worked, unless the angle was perfect, unless she remembered everything. Too many unlesses. But SEALs were built for that. She set her alarm for 4:30 and slept for the first time in days. Morning came cold and merciless. She dressed in layers, compression gear under the tactical jacket, checked her watch camera. Then drove to the hangar through fog that turned the world into a gray dream. Empty lot, good. She began pre-flight inspection, each click of the checklist steadying her nerves. The Bell 47 was immaculate, no mechanical issues, which meant if she died today, the official story would be pilot error. At 6:50, headlights cut through the fog. Victor Reeves stepped out first, built like a man who still worked out his sins in the gym. Behind him, a younger pilot, Garrett Walsh. His handshake was firm, but his palms slick with sweat. Morning, she said evenly. Victor's smile was professional. You ready, Commander? Always. They lifted off at 7:12, blades slicing the dawn. For 30 minutes, the flight was routine. Sarah pointed out ridgelines and wind patterns, the casual banter of professionals at work. But she could feel it, the weight of intent in the air. Then Victor leaned forward. "Garrett, take us up to 6,000. Maintain over the forest." Sarah's grip tightened slightly on the cyclic. "Showtime." Victor unbuckled his harness, hands slipping into his jacket. When it emerged, a tactical knife gleamed. "You should have kept your nose out of things, Sarah," he said lightly. "Danny liked you, thought you'd fit in, but you had to go digging." She kept her tone calm. "Found the manifests, the smuggling routes. My father found them too, didn't he?" Victor's smile thinned. "Your father was stubborn, didn't know when to stop asking questions, so he had an accident." Her pulse slowed to combat rhythm. "Accident," she repeated. "That what you tell yourself when you run people off the road?" He shrugged. "It's cleaner than murder." Garrett's jaw clenched. His eyes wouldn't meet hers. "How much did he pay you?" she asked quietly. "How much for one veteran's life?" 20 grand, Victor answered. "Same as the last guy who helped with your dad." Sarah studied Garrett. "One day you'll have to live with that number." "Shut up," Garrett snapped, voice cracking. "She's stalling," Victor said. "Do it." Garrett's hand trembled on the door latch. Sarah exhaled slowly. The world sharpened into crystal clarity. "One more thing," she said. "You both made one mistake." Victor smirked. "Oh yeah, what's that?" "You assumed I'd fight you." She unbuckled her harness. The door burst open, wind howling into the cabin. Victor lunged, Garrett hesitated. And Sarah moved first. She let them push her, used their momentum. Hands found the seams on her jacket. For an instant her eyes met Victor's, calm, almost pitying. "SEALs don't need parachutes," she said. "We just need the will to survive." And then she was gone. The wind hit like a hammer. She tumbled, caught in the helicopter's downdraft, spinning. Then spread out, stabilizing, arms wide, legs locked, air resistance clawing at her. Below, the Bitterroot spread out in greens and silvers, the river a thin ribbon of steel. 40 seconds. Her fingers tore the hidden seams. Fabric exploded around her like wings, not enough to fly, just enough to fight gravity's cruelty. 30 seconds. She angled her descent, searching for turbulence, depth, current. The water below churned white, good, deep. 20 seconds. Her father's voice echoed. "Pain is just information, baby girl. Listen, don't let it own you." 10. Arms tight, ankles locked, spine aligned. 5. She whispered a prayer that wasn't for safety, but for purpose. Impact. The world became noise and pain and blackness. And somehow she kept breathing. How long had she been underwater? Seconds, minutes, time didn't exist in the darkness, only pain and cold. The shock of the river was worse than the fall. It wasn't water, it was ice made liquid. It clawed at her lungs, her skin, her will to keep fighting. Her body screamed to breathe, but instinct whispered not yet. She kicked again. Felt gravel, silt, then nothing. The current caught her, tumbling her like debris. Rocks slammed into her ribs. Pain flared white. Her shoulders screamed with every movement, a grinding agony that meant torn ligaments, or worse. Still she fought. Her hands found purchase on a submerged branch. She dragged herself upward. The world erupted into sound as her head broke the surface. She gasped, sucking in air mixed with spray. The current still owned her, throwing her downstream through rapids that tore at her like living claws. Her eyes burned from cold. Her muscles were seizing. And every second she stayed in that water was a death sentence. She scanned the banks, too steep, no easy exit. Ahead, a fallen tree stretched across the river, its branches skeletal and slick. She aimed for it. The current fought back, trying to drag her under. But she was a seal, trained to swim through chaos, through fear, through bullets and blood and darkness. When her fingers finally brushed bark, she clamped down with everything she had left. One arm at a time, she pulled herself toward the bank. Every movement was pain. Every breath was fire. By the time she reached solid ground, her vision was narrowing to a tunnel. The world tilted. Her knees hit mud. Then her face. Then darkness again. Somewhere far away, an engine hummed. Not a helicopter, lower, slower. A boat. Sarah forced her eyes open. Everything was blurred, edges haloed in frost and light. A voice called out in accented English, carried by the wind. "If someone is out here, I am Miguel Torres. I saw something fall from the sky. If you are alive, I will help you." Her first instinct was caution. The second was survival. Her body was shutting down. Hypothermia had already started whispering lies. Just rest, it's easier. But her training screamed louder. Move or die. She staggered from the tree line, one arm wrapped around her ribs, the other raised weakly. Miguel's eyes widened as he steered the small fishing boat closer. "Mater de Dios, you fell from that helicopter." Sarah tried to speak, but her jaw was too stiff. The words came out slurred. "Long story, need warmth, now." The man didn't hesitate. He reached out, pulled her into the boat like she weighed nothing. Up close, he smelled of river water and tobacco. His hands were rough but careful. "Hold on," he said, pushing the throttle. "We go to my cabin, my wife, she fix you up." She wanted to ask if he worked for Castellano, if this was another setup. But the cold made suspicion a luxury. She passed out before they reached shore. Warmth woke her, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes you remember what being human feels like. She was in a cabin, a small one, wood stove glowing. The air smelled of soup and pine. A woman was kneeling beside her, checking her pulse. "Stay still," she said gently, accent thick but kind. "You have broken ribs, maybe shoulder too." Where Sarah's throat burned. "My home," said the woman. "I am Maria. My husband found you in river." Miguel appeared at the doorway, carrying towels and a look of quiet amazement. "You should be dead," he said simply. Sarah managed a faint smile. "That's what they keep telling me." Maria wrapped her in dry clothes that smelled of wood smoke. Each touch sent pain lancing through her ribs, but the heat felt like salvation. "You need doctor," Maria said, frowning. "Proper hospital." Sarah shook her head. "Can't, they'll report it. Castellano has people everywhere." At the name, Miguel's face changed. Recognition, anger. "Danny Castellano," he repeated, voice dark. "My nephew worked for him 2 years ago, asked too many questions, fell from scaffolding. Now he cannot walk." Sarah met his gaze. "Then you understand why I can't go to a hospital." Miguel nodded slowly. "You stay here. My daughter is nurse. She visit tonight. She will bring medicine. We keep secrets." The hours crawled. The pain dulled into something almost tolerable. Outside, the forest breathed, the steady rhythm of wind through pines, a reminder that the world kept moving even when yours had stopped. Sarah sat near the stove, wrapped in blankets, sipping broth. Maria insisted she finish. Her reflection in the window startled her. Pale, hollow-eyed, hair matted, the proud seal reduced to a ghost. But she was alive. And that meant the mission wasn't over. She replayed the fall in her mind, dissecting every frame. The jacket's drag panels had worked, barely. Her ribs were broken, shoulder wrecked, but she was walking, breathing. And breathing meant fighting. When the door opened that evening, Sarah reached instinctively for a weapon she didn't have. But it was only a young woman in scrubs, carrying a medical bag. "Ma," she called, then stopped short, eyes widening at the sight of Sarah. "Who is this?" "Her name is Sarah," Miguel said softly. "She needs your help." The young woman, Emma, crossed the room, clinical professionalism overtaking surprise. "Broken ribs," she murmured, examining her. "Possible torn ligaments, mild concussion, you're lucky." "Luck had nothing to do with it," Sarah said through clenched teeth. Emma glanced at her mother. "She fell in the river." Miguel hesitated. "She fell from a helicopter." Emma froze, then looked back at Sarah. "You should be dead." Sarah gave a faint, exhausted grin. "You're the second person to say that today." The nurse worked in silence after that, wrapping ribs, injecting painkillers, bracing her shoulder. Each touch professional, efficient. "You've done this before," Emma said finally. "You move like someone who's been trained to ignore pain." 12 years, Sarah replied. "Navy SEAL." Emma's eyes softened with respect. "Then you already know what comes next. Rest, food, no heroics until your body lets you." "I can give it 24 hours, Sarah said. "Then I move." 24 hours, Emma agreed, handing her a cup of water. "After that, you're on your own conscience." Before she left, she turned back at the door. "My brother was the one who fell from the scaffolding," she said quietly. "If you're going after Danny Castellano, finish it." That night the cabin was quiet. Maria hummed a hymn as she cleaned dishes. Miguel sat by the window, watching the river like a sentry. Sarah lay awake, every throb of pain reminding her she was still in the fight. Her father's letter was still in her jacket pocket. She read it again by the light of the fire, her eyes tracing every curve of his handwriting. "Sometimes the uniform isn't enough. Sometimes you have to be willing to stand alone." She closed her eyes, whispered into the silence. "I'm not alone, Dad, not anymore." She woke hours later to voices. At first she thought she was dreaming. Then she recognized one of them. "Doc." Bull Patterson stood in the cabin doorway, snow in his beard. Two men flanking him, Diesel and Ghost, her extraction team. "Damn good to see you breathing," Bull said. "We've been watching the forest since dawn. Figured if anyone could walk away from that fall, it'd be you." Sarah sat up, grimacing. "How bad is it out there?" "Danny's got search teams sweeping the river," Diesel reported. "They're focused about 5 miles north of here. Dive teams, ground units, even a chopper." "Good," Sarah said. "That means they still think I'm dead." "Not for long," Ghost added. "Victor Reeves isn't stupid. When they can't find a body, he'll start expanding the grid." Bull stepped forward, producing a weatherproof case. "Stopped by Rattlesnake Gorge before we came here. Found your father's stash. Everything he documented, 6 months of evidence. It's all here." Sarah's breath caught. "You found it?" "Every bit of it." Bull's eyes softened. "He was right about everything, Doc. Castellano, the judge, the sheriff. And he wasn't working alone. This thing's bigger than Montana." Sarah opened the case with trembling hands. Inside, neat folders, USB drives, photos, logs, her father's handwriting everywhere. For a long moment she said nothing, just stared at the proof of his courage and the weight he'd passed to her. Bull rested a hand on her shoulder. "He trusted you to finish this. I think he knew you'd have to walk through hell to do it." Sarah looked up, eyes hard now. "Then hell's about to get crowded." By dawn she was already planning. Her ribs ached, her shoulders screamed, but the fog of trauma had burned away, in its place purpose. She organized the files, cross-referencing names and routes, seeing the shape of the beast they were fighting. Weapons shipments to militia groups in Idaho. Cash laundering through fake medevac contracts. Judge Whitmore dismissing cases before they reached court. Sheriff Braddock burying evidence. It wasn't corruption, it was infrastructure. By the time Bull returned with coffee, she'd built an outline of a war plan. "It's not just about Danny," she said quietly. "He's a cog. We take him down, someone else replaces him. We need to expose the whole machine." Bull nodded. "You've got a plan." "I've got the beginning of one." He smiled faintly. That's how every SEAL op starts. She glanced at the window, where sunlight broke through the snow clouds. They thought I was finished when they threw me out of that helicopter. They forgot something my father taught me. What's that? Bull asked. That survival isn't the victory, she said softly. What you do after, that's what defines you. Outside, the forest was quiet again. The river flowed, carrying secrets downstream. But in a cabin hidden deep in the Montana wilderness, a woman who had fallen 6,000 feet was already rising again. And the men who had tried to kill her were running out of sky. When Sarah woke, she thought she was still falling. Her body jerked, heart slamming against her ribs. But it wasn't wind she heard this time. It was the soft crackle of a wood stove and the quiet murmur of voices outside the cabin. For a second she just lay there, listening, breathing, remembering. She wasn't in the air anymore. She was in a borrowed bed, wrapped in quilts that smelled of pine and smoke, alive in defiance of gravity and men who thought she couldn't be. Every movement hurt. Her ribs felt like glass. Her shoulder burned with a deep mechanical pain, but pain was familiar. Pain was a language she spoke fluently. She swung her legs off the bed and stood, slowly, carefully, her bare feet meeting cold wood. Through the cracked door she could see Bull Patterson sitting at the table with Miguel, a pot of coffee between them. Two men carved by different wars, bound by the same code. Protect those who can't protect themselves. Bull noticed her before she spoke. Morning, Doc. Sarah nodded faintly, still alive. Yeah, he said, that seems to be your habit. Miguel smiled softly from across the table. We were just talking about how you survived something impossible. Sarah poured herself a cup of coffee, the steam clouding her vision for a moment. It wasn't impossible, just statistically stupid. Bull chuckled, but the humor didn't last long. We've got a problem. Danny's people are expanding the search. 10 miles of river, dive teams, dogs. They think they'll find a body. They won't, Sarah said. And when they don't, they'll realize I'm still breathing. That's when the real hunt begins. She took a slow sip of the coffee. We can't stay here. Bull nodded. Already figured that. Ghost and Diesel are prepping a secondary site. Remote hunting cabin 15 miles northeast. Defensible. You'll have time to heal, time to plan. Sarah set down the cup. Her ribs protested with every breath, but her eyes were clear, focused. And the evidence. Bull tapped the weatherproof case sitting on the table. Everything your dad documented. 6 months of smuggling logs, financial records, even recorded calls between Danny and the judge. It's solid. Sarah moved to the window, watching the trees sway under the cold morning wind. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. Sometimes the uniform isn't enough. Sometimes you have to stand alone. Then we stand, she said quietly, but not alone. By mid-morning, the fallen riders were in motion. Diesel drove an old pickup along forest roads no GPS could find, Ghost navigating from memory. Bull followed in a second vehicle, Maria and Miguel in tow to ensure the route looked innocent. Just a few locals heading to a hunting lodge for winter prep. Sarah rode in the backseat, bundled under a blanket, her shoulder in a brace Emma had adjusted before departure. Each bump of the road was a reminder that she was alive and broken in equal measure. When the convoy reached the cabin, it looked like nothing. A structure of gray wood half swallowed by the forest. No power lines, no mail, no trail markers. Perfect. Diesel swept the perimeter, Ghost checked sightlines. Bull tested the generator. Sarah limped inside, eyes scanning the space automatically. Exits, cover points, tactical choke zones. Old habits didn't die. They just changed missions. The cabin was small but practical. Food supplies, med gear, basic comms equipment. More importantly, isolation. This will work, she said. Bull nodded. You've got security in shifts. Diesel's first watch, Ghost after him. You rest and start going through that evidence. We'll handle the perimeter." Sarah looked at him. "You trust these men with your life?" "Every day," Bull replied. "And they trust you with theirs. That's how this works." When they left her alone, she opened the case. Her father's handwriting covered the first folder, precise, military. Every page smelled faintly of motor oil and paper dust. She started reading, and the world narrowed to lines and numbers and lies. Fuel logs altered. Maintenance forms falsified. Coordinates identical to militia training camps in Idaho. She traced payment routes through shell companies, notes detailing money laundering, records of shipments listed as medical relief cargo that never reached their destinations. By the time she reached the second folder, her hands were trembling. The deeper she dug, the clearer it became. Her father hadn't stumbled onto a small-town scam. This was organized crime wearing a small-town mask. Judge Whitmore had dismissed 19 cases connected to Castellano in 3 years. Sheriff Braddock had reassigned or silenced deputies who asked too many questions. And Summit Aviation had been running illegal flights across 3 state lines. Her father had been building a map of corruption, and it had cost him his life. When she found the final page, his last note, it broke her. "I have everything I need now. Tomorrow I drive to Helena. If something happens, she'll know what to do. Finish this, baby girl, for both of us." Her vision blurred, not from pain, from grief she'd buried for years under the armor of discipline and duty. Bull found her hours later, surrounded by papers spread across the floor like a battlefield. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Sarah didn't look up. He didn't just die because he was investigating. He died because he was close, too close. Bull leaned against the doorframe. "And now you're closer." She exhaled slowly. "Then I'd better make it count." By dawn, the plan had begun to form. Sarah's injuries were still bad, but she'd been trained to fight through worse. She spent the next day cataloging the files, cross-referencing timelines, building a tactical picture of Danny's operation. When Bull returned with breakfast, she was already outlining a counteroffensive. "This isn't just about Danny," she said. "If we only take him down, the rest of the network survives. We need a full exposure, judge, sheriff, logistics, everything. One coordinated strike." Bull studied her face. "You've got a strategy." "I've got a start," she admitted. "But I'll need help, legal, journalistic, federal, and people who can move faster than the system." Bull smiled faintly. "You're describing us, Doc." "Then we start there." The next 48 hours blurred into movement. Emma returned with more supplies, patching Sarah's shoulder and warning that her body was reaching its limit. Miguel and Maria packed up their home, heading to Idaho under fallen rider protection before Danny's men could connect the dots. Bull made calls, quiet ones, the kind that didn't leave digital footprints. By the second night, the cabin had become a command center. Maps on the walls, evidence pinned with color-coded notes, radios crackling softly under static. Sarah sat at the table, her arm in a sling, eyes locked on a hand-drawn diagram of Danny's network. She traced each line slowly with a pencil. Danny right arrow, Judge Whitmore right arrow, Sheriff Braddock right arrow, shell companies, right arrow, Canadian smuggling routes. It was all connected, a web of greed built on violence and silence. "You ever notice," she said quietly, "that corruption never rots loud, it rots quiet, behind closed doors under paperwork and smiles?" Bull looked up from cleaning his sidearm. "Yeah, until someone kicks the door open." Sarah nodded. "That's what we're going to do." The following morning, as fog lifted from the trees, headlights approached the cabin. Ghost stepped outside, weapon ready, but the vehicle was familiar, a weathered Jeep. Bull exhaled. "That's Rebecca." The journalist climbed out, wind whipping her hair. Mid-30s, sharp eyes, the kind of woman who'd seen too much and stopped being impressed by power. "Lieutenant Commander Hendrickx," she said, shaking Sarah's hand. "I got your message and the files." Sarah gestured her inside. "Then you know what we're up against." Rebecca set down her laptop, eyes flicking over the organized chaos of maps and documents. "I've been chasing Castellano for months," she said. "Never had the proof until now." "You believe me then?" Rebecca smirked faintly. "I believed you before you fell 6,000 feet. That just made the story better." Sarah allowed herself a small laugh, the first in days. Rebecca's tone softened. "I also know the FBI's been sniffing around Judge Whitmore for over a year. I can make a call, quietly." "Do it," Sarah said. "But tell them nothing they can trace back here. Not yet. Not until we control the timing." "Got it." Rebecca began unpacking her notes, merging her investigation with Sarah's father's files. The board on the wall grew denser. Names, dates, routes, photos of aircraft. By the time dusk fell, the three of them stood staring at it, the scope of it finally clear. "This isn't just Montana," Rebecca murmured. "This thing stretches across state lines, Idaho, Wyoming, maybe farther." "Then we don't take down a man," Sarah said. "We take down a network." That night the forest was silent, but Sarah couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, staring out at the tree line where fog drifted like ghosts. The ache in her shoulder pulsed with every heartbeat, but she barely noticed any more. Pain was part of the rhythm now. In her hand, she held her father's letter again. The edges were worn from rereading. Sometimes the uniform isn't enough. He'd been right. You couldn't always fight evil by following orders. Sometimes you had to break the chain of command to do what was right. She whispered into the quiet, her voice steady but soft. "I'm still here, Dad, and I'm not done." Behind her, Bull's voice came from the shadows. "None of us are." Sarah turned, realizing he'd been watching from the doorway. He stepped closer, the firelight catching the scars on his face. "You've got something rare, Doc. Most people survive and try to forget. You survive and try to fix." She met his gaze. "Someone has to." He smiled faintly. "Yeah, but just remember, redemption's a hard road, even for the righteous." Sarah looked out the window again, at the dark forest that hid both danger and salvation. "I don't need redemption," she said quietly. "I need justice." Morning came cold and blue. A light snow fell over the treetops as the first rays of sun broke through. Diesel stood outside, scanning the ridge with binoculars. "We've got movement," he called softly. "Truck, 2 miles out, could be local, could be Castellano's scouts." Sarah was already moving, pain forgotten, mind switching to operational mode. "Pack everything. We relocate if they get within a mile. No comms, no signatures, we stay ghosts." The fallen riders moved with silent efficiency, the muscle memory of soldiers who'd done this before. When Diesel confirmed the truck had turned away, Sarah finally relaxed, but only a little. "They'll find us eventually," Bull said. "I know," she replied. "That's why we're not hiding, we're preparing." Bull raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For the counterstrike." In that cabin, under the hum of the generator and the whisper of the snow, Sarah Hendrickx began planning a war. Not one fought with soldiers or rifles, but with truth, exposure, and timing. She would draw them out, piece by piece. And when the trap closed, there wouldn't be anywhere left for them to hide. Because this wasn't revenge. It was justice measured in precision. The woman they had thrown from a helicopter had landed back on her feet. And she was done falling. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt silence like this. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that hums with what's about to break. Outside, snow fell soft and steady. Inside, the air was thick with planning, maps, names, red markers, and a tension that refused to rest. Sarah Hendrickx sat at the head of the cabin table, the fire behind her throwing flickers of orange across her face. Her shoulder still throbbed, her ribs still ached, but she'd stopped noticing pain days ago. In front of her were the faces of those who'd chosen to stay. Bull, Diesel, Ghost, Rebecca. 4 people, 1 mission. Expose the network. Destroy it from the inside out. And make sure her father's death meant something. Judge Whitmore's the keystone, Rebecca said, scrolling through photos on her laptop. He's the one laundering Danny's money through legal settlements. Without him, the entire web collapses. Then we start with him, Sarah said. Bull shook his head. You go after the judge first, Danny'll smell it. He'll burn his records and vanish before the story hits daylight. Sarah leaned forward, eyes hard. Then we make Danny think he's safe. We feed him false security while we take apart his protection layer by layer. Diesel nodded slowly, like stripping armor before the kill shot. Exactly. Rebecca frowned. We'll need proof that Whitmore is directly connected, something solid. Documents won't be enough. He'll claim they were forged. Then we record him admitting it, Sarah said simply. How? She opened a drawer, pulling out a small black device, a micro-audio recorder disguised as a cufflink. The judge plays golf every Friday at Cascade Ridge. Danny's always there. If someone were to bump into them, maybe spill a drink, maybe leave behind a bug. Bull whistled low. You're talking about walking straight into their backyard. Sarah's eyes didn't waver. I've walked into worse. Rebecca hesitated. Sarah, you've barely recovered if they see you. They won't. Bull exhaled through his nose, the look of a man who'd seen this kind of fire before. You already decided, didn't you? Sarah nodded once. I'm not asking for permission, just backup. The next morning came gray and sharp. Snow gave way to rain as clouds sank low over Cascade Ridge Country Club, a private retreat for men who wore guilt like expensive suits. Sarah walked through the lobby in civilian clothes, jeans, jacket, baseball cap, no limp, no tell. She looked like anyone else. In her left ear, a thin wire earpiece hummed softly. Bull's voice came through from the surveillance van parked a half-mile away. Audio check. Copy, she whispered. Rebecca's voice followed. You've got about 15 minutes before Whitmore arrives. Danny's already there, corner booth, bar area. Sarah adjusted the cuff of her jacket, feeling the small recorder in place. Her right hand brushed her ribs, still tender but steady enough. She took a slow breath, then stepped inside the bar. Danny Castellano looked exactly the same. Expensive jacket, smug posture, the false charm of a man who believed power made him untouchable. Across from him sat Judge Whitmore, older, gray-haired, the kind of man who smiled only when cameras were near. Sarah kept her distance, pretending to text. The bar was noisy, the perfect cover. Whitmore leaned closer to Danny. The sheriff says the body hasn't been found. Maybe it never will. Danny smirked. Trust me, Harold, that river's deep enough to bury a ghost. Sarah's jaw tightened. She forced her fingers to stay still. Whitmore chuckled softly. You should have burned her ID. If anyone finds out she was a SEAL. Relax, Danny said. I've been doing this a long time. She's gone. The operation's clean. Bull's voice crackled in her ear. We've got the line, keep them talking. Sarah shifted her stance, accidentally bumping into a waiter who passed behind her. The collision sent a glass of bourbon tumbling onto the floor beside Danny's booth. Oh, I'm so sorry, she said quickly, crouching to help. Danny turned, annoyed, but didn't recognize her. She dyed her hair darker, cut shorter, her posture, her tone, civilian calm. It's fine, he muttered. Sarah smiled politely, setting a napkin on the table, right over the cufflink device she just slipped from her sleeve. Let me replace that drink, she said, standing. Forget it, Danny said, already turning back to Whitmore. Appreciate your understanding, she murmured, walking away. By the time she reached the exit, Bull's voice whispered in her ear again. "Device is transmitting. We're live." In the surveillance van, Rebecca leaned over the console, eyes wide as the first clear words came through. "If the feds sniff around, I'll make the sheriff bury the report," Whitmore was saying. "He's done it before." Danny laughed quietly. "And if they don't back off, then I remind them how their campaigns get funded." Rebecca hit record, her hands trembling slightly. "Got it, got them both." Bull smiled grimly. "Now we just need the sheriff." Back at the cabin that night, Sarah listened to the playback. Every word was a nail in the coffin. But the sound of Danny's laugh, the same tone he'd used before throwing her from the helicopter, cut deeper than any wound. She stopped the tape, staring at the recorder for a long time. Bull watched her from across the room. "You okay?" Sarah nodded slowly. "Yeah, just remembering what gravity feels like." The next step was Sheriff Braddock. Rebecca traced his routines. Small-town lawman persona, morning coffee at the diner, afternoons at the range, evenings drinking alone in his office. "He keeps a locked cabinet with cash and hard drives," Rebecca said. "Probably kickback money, but getting inside that station won't be easy." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Does he still use the old patrol shed behind the lot?" Rebecca nodded. "Yeah, why?" Sarah stood. "Because that shed's got a vent that leads straight into his office. My dad showed me when I was a kid." Bull looked up. "You're saying we break in?" "No," Sarah said. "We walk in at night quiet." Diesel grinned. Finally something familiar. The operation began after midnight. Snow fell in whispering flakes, muffling their footsteps. The sheriff's office sat dark, a single light glowing in the upper window. Sarah moved first, every step silent, the cold biting into her lungs. Diesel covered the back. Ghost kept the lookout. She slipped through the chain-link gap behind the maintenance shed, just like her father once had. The vent grill was rusted but loose. Inside, the smell of old coffee and paper filled the air. Her flashlight beam swept across the sheriff's desk. Photos of hunting trips, awards, smiles that didn't reach his eyes. She went straight for the cabinet. Locked. She reached into her pocket, pulling a tension wrench and pick. Her hands worked from memory, each click a heartbeat. Then snap. Open. Stacks of cash. Folders labeled closed cases. And a small external hard drive. She slipped it into her jacket. Then she froze. Footsteps. The office door creaked open, and Sheriff Braddock stepped inside, half drunk, muttering to himself. Sarah ducked behind the desk, silent. He sat down heavily, rubbing his eyes. Damn insomnia. He reached for the whiskey bottle on the desk, and his hand brushed the half-open drawer. He frowned. Sarah's heart pounded once, hard. Then she moved. In one smooth motion, she stepped out from behind the desk, gun leveled, voice steady. "Morning, Sheriff." He froze, eyes wide. "What the hell?" "Don't." Recognition dawned, shock chasing it. You're supposed to be dead." Sarah's expression didn't change. "Supposed to be." He swallowed. "If you're smart, you'll walk away from this. You don't know who you're up against." "Oh, I know," she said quietly. "I know exactly who you are." Her left hand held the recorder up. The red light blinked once. "Start talking." He sneered. "You think I'm scared of you?" "No," she said, "but you're scared of what comes next if you don't." She gestured to the window, where a faint red dot danced across his chest. Ghost sniper laser. Braddock's breath caught. "Jesus Christ." "Talk," Sarah said again. He cracked first. They always did. Within minutes the truth spilled out. Names, accounts, payments, orders. Every word was recorded. Every lie he'd told in court now bound him in truth. When it was over, she stepped back. "That's all I needed." He leaned forward, voice low and desperate. "They'll kill me." Sarah's eyes were cold. "Then you'll finally understand what you did to others." She turned and vanished into the snow. By sunrise, the hard drive and recordings were in Rebecca's hands. Whitmore, Braddock, Castellano. All connected. All trapped. Rebecca sat at her laptop, uploading the data through encrypted channels. FBI's going to get this in 12 hours. After that, the story goes public. Sarah exhaled slowly, her body trembling with exhaustion she refused to show. Good, but Danny won't wait 12 hours. He'll move the second he knows something's wrong. Bull nodded grimly. Then we need to move first. That evening, Sarah stood on the porch, watching the last light fade over the valley. The forest was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes before a storm. She thought of her father, of the letter, of the river that should have been her grave. Her voice came soft, half prayer, half promise. They think justice comes from the system, but sometimes justice starts with the people the system broke. Bull joined her, hands in his jacket pockets. "You really think the FBI's gonna clean this up?" "No," she said, "but they'll make it loud enough that the world listens. That's all I need." He studied her face. "And what about Danny?" Sarah's jaw set. "He's mine." Inside, Rebecca watched the upload reach 72%. Then the screen flickered. "Connection lost." "Bull," she called, "we've got interference." A low rumble cut through the night. Diesel burst through the door, engines, multiple, coming up the ridge. Sarah was already reaching for her sidearm. How many? 3 trucks, maybe more. Ghost appeared beside him, eyes sharp. "They found us." Sarah stepped to the window. Headlights glowed in the distance, cutting through snow like knives. She turned to the team, voice calm, measured, absolute. "Everyone take positions. Backup drive secured." "Locked and loaded," Rebecca said. "Good," Sarah chambered her pistol. "Then we hold the line." Bull gave a grim smile. "Just like old times." Sarah nodded once, eyes cold fire. "No," she said, "this time we finish it." What happens when the people who taught you to survive are the same people you have to ask to die for you? They came up the ridge slow at first, like a shadow feeling its way into light, and then fast, a dark ribbon of headlights cutting the snow. 3 trucks. 2 of them had heavy cages welded into the beds. Men moving like professionals, not amateurs, not hungry thieves, soldiers for hire. Sarah felt the old adrenaline rise, a mechanical sympathy that stitched into bone. It should have been simple: hunker down, hold tight, trade space for time. But simple had a cost. People had names. People had faces. People who trusted her because of promises she'd made when she was softer, less broken. She moved through the cabin like a woman made for small, precise violence, every step measured, every breath a metronome. Her shoulder burned with a steady, insistent pain, honest pain, the kind that reminds you you're real, but it didn't slow her. Pain was an instrument she learned to play. Outside, Diesel and Ghost launched to their positions. Mama Bear took the inside hallway, ready to shepherd any non-combatants to the safe room. Bull took the backline, rifle ready but expression clouded. Rebecca sat at the radio table, hands steady, eyes scanning the feeds. Wrench, leg wrapped in a tourniquet, favored his side but refused to be put down. He loaded his shotgun with a grin that tried to make joke of the limp. "Positions," Sarah said, and the voice that answered was not fear but profession. They had no illusions about the odds. Danny could field more men, he had money, and money bought mobility, brutality, and talent. But they had something else: knowledge, the timeline, the map of his operation, the hard drives, and the willingness to let the truth be loud. The first truck stopped 200 yards out, engine idling. Men spilled out in dark clothing, rifles slung. Searchlights swept the tree line, silvering every branch. Their movements were quick, practiced, no hesitation, no wasted motion. Someone in Danny's camp had experience beyond local muscle. Maybe Victor Reeves, maybe a former PMC. Whoever they were, they'd planned for a siege. They'd not just expected Sarah's ghost to be alive, they'd come ready to excise it. A cold flare of anger passed through Sarah, raw and useless, but honest. She thought of her father's handwriting, of his last note asking her to finish it. She thought of the river and the way it hadn't wanted to let her live. She thought of every small, careful human kindness: Miguel's boat, Maria's hands, Emma's medical steadiness, and the quiet obligation that bloomed into something fierce. "Rebecca status," she murmured. "The upload stalled when we lost the connection," Rebecca said. Her fingers were not panicked. They were working. "I'm routing it through 2 mirrors. I can get the file out in maybe 5 minutes if no one breaks the line." "Then keep that line alive," Sarah said. "We hold until it's done." Bull's voice came low from the outer window. "They sent a scout, 2 guys moving to flank from the north." Sarah nodded. "Ghost and Diesel intercept, no contact if possible, slow them down." They moved like ghosts. Diesel's old ranger instincts were visible in the way he melted through trees. Ghost's air rescue training showed in the math of his timing. How long until the north flank could be neutralized without alerting the trucks? The night breathed around them, smoke and fog and a thin falling snow that hissed when it met warm gunmetal. The first light cuts came at the edge of the clearing. 2 men stepped into the open and saw nothing but a battered cabin. They walked right into a booby trap Diesel had set, chains strung low, noisemakers that sent a clatter and a clumsy scream into the dark. The first minute of contact was chaos by design. Confusion bought them seconds. Seconds bought Rebecca time. Shots cracked like staccato. Not many. Precise. Warning shots meant to tell the attackers that the defenders were awake and willing. The trucks answered back with heavier caliber, punctuating the night with sound that made pictures in the walls. Windows shivered. The wood stove rattled its lonely percussion to the rhythm of ricochets. In the hallway, Mama Bear's hands were steady as she shepherded Rebecca and the 2 Torres family photos into the safe room, bolting the door and setting improvised barricades. She whispered to Rebecca like a mother steadying a child at a carnival ride. No dramatics, just matter-of-fact competence. "You tell me when that upload hits. I'll start the exit plan." Sarah felt her body hum with focus. She monitored the angles, the doors, their cover. She smelled the gun oil, the coffee left cold on the table, the metallic edge of fear. But mostly she listened to voices outside, to the radio chatter of men too confident in the night. Over it all was the low, mechanical confidence of Victor Reeves' voice, the one that'd been in the helicopter. Precise, cruel, professional. "Victor, on comms," Bull said. "Sounds like he's coordinating." Sarah's jaw tightened. Victor wasn't just muscle. He was the planner who believed in plausible deniability. He liked to think he was clean. The knife in the heli had proved otherwise. An hour stretched into another. Snow thickened. The searchlights started sweeping wider, throwing the cabin into cinematic pulses of light and shadow. Men moved like predators, methodically cutting roads, corralling the perimeter. Someone in the second truck set up a small drone to sweep the tree line, cheap tech, effective when combined with brute force. "This is getting close," Ghost reported low. "They're crawling the underbrush. They're looking for footprints, trails." "We burn our tracks," Sarah said. "No straight lines, split up, make them chase ghosts." They moved through the cabin in practiced choreography. Bull and Diesel set demolition traps that would slow any forced entry. Mama Bear made sure noncombatants were in the most defensible corner. Ghost set listening devices to warn of tunneling or sappers. Wrench, bless him, insisted on taking a forward foxhole despite the limp. He loaded his shotgun not with bravado, but with the kind of resigned fury that comes of fighting back, because you know what happens if you don't. Outside, a loudspeaker crackled. "Sarah Hendrickx, we know you took files, give them up. There's still a chance." The voice belonged to a man too used to giving commands that stuck. The threat was thinly veiled. The world had rules. People with money bent those rules. Sarah looked at the microphone. She could have answered with fire, with a mic drop, with lines that would make the villain voice crack on the radio. Instead, she thought of her father's letter. Sometimes you have to stand alone. Sometimes you have to bring everyone with you. Tell Danny, she said softly into the open comms, but the message went through Rebecca's earpiece as well. You can kill me tonight. You can kill me tomorrow, but the files aren't here because you think we're stupid. They're already in motion. The world's listening. Silence followed that statement like a held breath. The loudspeaker clicked off. For a heartbeat, the entire valley seemed to hold its breath with them. Then the assault began. They didn't come all at once. That would be easy. They probed. A man at the back door, a flashbang lobbed to the left that rang like an animal, a pair trying to breach the porch. Bullets rattled, wood splintered. The cabin became a cathedral of noise and smoke. Sarah found a rhythm. Fire, reposition, quiet. Bull and Diesel worked as a pair, overlapping arcs, suppressive fire that kept the attackers from focusing. Ghost covered flanks, reading the enemy's tendency like a mathematician analyzing a series. Rebecca kept the upload tethered, rerouting as lines died and reborn. Mama Bear carried a wounded man, one of the tour's relatives, behind the safe room curtain, eyes full of something holy and terrible. At one point, a man breached the east window and came over the couch, pistol raised. He hesitated, squinting into the dim, and that hesitation was the mistake that cost him everything. Wrench was on him before he could blink, shotgun through the broken window, a roar of buckshot that knocked the intruder back and into the snow like a felled tree. Wrench swore, not because he'd shot a man, but because he'd had to. The reality of making other men fall weighed on him more than the pain in his leg. Keep it together, Sarah told them, voice small and magnified in the chaos. We don't murder, we detain, we document, we expose. This was her line. This was where she refused to become what she fought. There's a point where justice becomes revenge, and the wrong side of that line is a mirror that eats you. She'd seen that mirror in men who'd bent law for profit. She wasn't going to live in it. They called for medevac at 200, no response. Danny knew how to keep channels open and closed. The attackers shifted tactics, switching to a more surgical pattern, trying to isolate the cabin, choking off exits. Someone tried to set fire to the shed. Diesel raced out and smothered the flame with a tarp and an unforgiving hand. As dawn bled into the sky, the night's violence thinned. The attackers retreated into the forest to lick wounds and reorganize, leaving behind a smoking perimeter and a few bodies. None of their own. That was deliberate. They hadn't wanted blood on the snow, not yet. They wanted leverage, fear. They wanted to break the will to resist. Inside, the cabin smelled of gunpowder and wet wool. Rebecca's laptop finally hit 100%. She exhaled helpless joy, a small human sound. It's out, she whispered. It's sent. The relief was immediate and deafening. For one stupid, wonderful second, the weight in Sarah's chest lifted. The files went to multiple feeds, FBI, national outlets Rebecca trusted, encrypted mirrors that would route through dozens servers. The truth would be loud. The truth would be ugly. The truth would be unstoppable. Then Victor's voice came through on a captured line, thin, furious. We'll be back, he said, and next time the river will be kinder. Sarah looked at him, at the men and women around her. Wrench sat, hand to his wound, smiling like a fool. Mama Bear checked IV lines with a tenderness she hadn't shown in years. Bull's face was the kind that knows war doesn't end in a nice photograph. Diesel polished a rifle like someone touching an old friend. Ghost stared at the tree line, not blinking. She wanted to feel triumph. She did, but the victory was half-born. The truth was out, but the machine that had fed it would not crumble overnight. Exposure didn't mean justice. It meant a fight that would widen and lengthen. It meant danger for everyone who'd helped. She let herself think briefly of the people she'd asked to move, Miguel and Maria, safe now in Idaho. Miguel's hands had been like oars that rowed her away from death. Maria's soup had been sanctuary. Their kindness had widened the orbit of this fight into something personal and humane. She owed them. Bull sat beside her and laid a rough hand on her shoulder. "You did good, kid." She closed her eyes. The pain took up its old place again, and she let it. It reminded her she hadn't been broken beyond repair. It reminded her she was human. And that was the strangest, most dangerous weapon of all, because being human meant being able to forgive, to remember why you fought in the first place. When the sun finally warmed the treetops, the valley was already waking to the sound of sirens in the distance, too distant to be immediate but close enough to hum a promise. The world was turning attention their way. Rebecca had done what she could to make sure the story couldn't be ignored. The FBI would be in motion. Agents would arrive, subpoenas would be signed, and for once the law would have teeth to bite. Sarah stood on the porch, looking at the tracks in the snow that led back to the trucks, now rutted and dirty, evidence that the men with money and guns had retreated. She felt every bruise, every broken bone, but she felt something more, an opening. Justice was messy. Justice was slow. Justice could be compromised by power and greed, but exposure had a way of changing the arithmetic. When the light hit the ledger and everyone could read it, the ledger's weight became accountability. She thought of her father again, of the way he taught her to shoot, not to kill but to be precise, of the way he'd put trust in her hands. She pressed the old letter into her palm and let the paper fold to the warmth of her skin. "Sometimes," she whispered, "dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." Behind her, Bull laughed, a small, hard sound. "Well then, act," he said. "We've got a lot more to do." She closed her hand around the letter and nodded. The fight was far from over, but for the first time since the fall, she felt the truth settle like ballast into her bones. They had survived the night. Now they would make the morning matter. Why do some victories feel quieter than defeat? The smoke had cleared, the firing had stopped, and dawn poured pale light through broken windows. But silence, Sarah realized, was its own kind of wound. The cabin stood scarred, bullet-pocked, but still standing. Her people were alive, the files were out. And yet, her chest felt hollow, as if the sound of battle had carried away something she could never quite retrieve. Bull sat on the porch steps, rifle across his knees, staring at the valley below. The snow had stopped. Steam rose from spent shell casings half buried in the drifts. Sarah walked out quietly, blanket wrapped around her shoulders, the morning air biting through it. "You sleep?" Bull asked without turning. She shook her head, tried. He nodded, eyes still fixed on the horizon. "Yeah, that's the hardest part, the quiet after the noise." She sat beside him, "How wrench?" "Stubborn," Bull said with a faint smile. "Which means he'll live. Diesel and Ghost are checking the perimeter again. Rebecca's inside, talking to the FBI on the secure line." Sarah looked toward the forest, her breath forming soft ghosts in the cold. "What did they say?" "Hard to tell," Bull said. "A lot of words like appreciate your cooperation and we'll take it from here. You know how it goes." Sarah's jaw tightened. "They're already trying to control the narrative." "Yeah," Bull said quietly, "they always do." Inside the cabin, Rebecca's voice was calm but strained. She was packing as she spoke into the encrypted satellite phone. "Yes, I have all the recordings. No, they're duplicated across multiple servers. That's not negotiable." A pause, then a sigh. "You don't understand. If she turns herself in, she dies. They've still got people out there. Victor Reeves is unaccounted for." Sarah entered as Rebecca ended the call. "They want you," Rebecca said. "FBI claims they can protect you if you come in for questioning." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Protect me from the people I just exposed." "Exactly," Rebecca said. "It's a trap, Sarah. You hand yourself over, you disappear into the paperwork. Danny's friends will have time to clean house, bury trails, spin the story." Sarah nodded slowly. "Then we don't give them that chance." Bull leaned against the wall. "So what's the play?" Sarah looked up, her voice was steady. We go public not through them, through everyone. Rebecca blinked. You mean a live broadcast? Sarah nodded. Tonight, full release, all files, all names, my face, my story. They can't kill what the world already knows. Bull frowned. You sure about that? Once you step into the light, there's no going back. I died once already, Sarah said. This time I choose what it means. The fallen riders moved with quiet purpose. They fought wars before, some in deserts, some in boardrooms, and they understood logistics better than most government units. Rebecca coordinated the upload. Ghost rigged extra power to the generators. Diesel scouted a secondary exit route in case things went sideways. By dusk, the small cabin had transformed into an impromptu broadcast hub. Cameras, mics, a satellite uplink that hummed softly under the snow-laden roof. Sarah stood before a cracked mirror, adjusting her jacket. The bruises along her neck had faded to yellow and blue. Her eyes, once hard with rage, now carried something quieter, heavier. Resolve. Rebecca set up the camera. Whenever you're ready. Sarah exhaled. Start rolling. She began with a whisper. My name is Lieutenant Commander Sarah Hendrickx, United States Navy, retired. If you're hearing this, then you already know part of the story. What you don't know is why. She paused, let the silence breathe. I was thrown from a helicopter by men who believed money could erase consequence, who thought power made them untouchable. They were wrong. Her eyes met the lens. My father, Deputy Michael Hendrickx, was murdered for uncovering the same network I exposed. They killed him because he refused to look away. I didn't survive to avenge him. I survived to finish what he started. Rebecca glanced at the live feed, the numbers climbing fast, thousands watching, then tens of thousands. Sarah continued, voice steady, every word a strike of purpose. Danny Castellano, Judge Harold Whitmore, Sheriff Alan Braddock. These are not rumors. These are facts. You'll find the recordings, the financial logs, and every piece of evidence in the public file attached to this stream. You'll see what happens when greed becomes law and justice becomes an accessory. She took a breath, her tone softening. But this isn't just about them. It's about all of us. About the quiet people who get crushed between power and apathy. About the good men and women who look away because they think it's not their fight. Her voice broke slightly, then steadied. I've been called a lot of things. A soldier, a survivor, a ghost, but I'm none of those tonight. I'm just someone tired of silence. Rebecca gave a small nod. You're live across 5 platforms. It's global. Sarah looked straight into the camera. They threw me from a helicopter to shut me up. I hit the ground and got louder. Then she ended the feed. The cabin was silent for a long moment after the broadcast cut. The only sound was the generator's low hum. Bull finally exhaled. Hell of a speech, Doc. Rebecca glanced at her monitor. You're trending in 30 countries. The files are mirrored on open archives. Danny's name is everywhere. Sarah sank into a chair, fatigue washing over her like a tide. Good, then we just wait. But waiting was never peace. At 11:42 p.m., Ghost returned from his watch, face pale. They're moving again, he said. Different trucks, smaller team this time, looks like Victor's crew. Sarah stood, how close? 2 miles and closing. They're not coming to destroy, they're coming to clean up. Rebecca's voice was tight. You said the files are already public. What's left to clean? Us, Bull said grimly. Sarah grabbed her sidearm. Then let's not make it easy. They prepared in silence. No speeches, no dramatics, just readiness. Sarah felt the ache in her shoulder as she chambered the first round. Her ribs still complained when she bent, but pain was an old friend now, a reminder of everything she'd survived. Through the open window, she saw the faint glimmer of headlights weaving through the forest road. Positions, she whispered. The fallen riders melted into the dark. Diesel took the southern approach. Ghost covered the tree line. Bull stood beside Sarah at the porch, both of them facing the narrow path that wound toward the cabin. Victor Reeves' voice came over the night like a snake. "Sarah, I know you're in there." Sarah's fingers tightened on her pistol. "You think your little video changes anything?" Victor called. "You think truth wins? Truth's just another weapon and you don't have enough of it." Sarah stepped forward onto the porch. "Maybe not," she said quietly, "but I've got enough to bury you." He laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "You think this ends with me? You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Then enlighten me," she said. Victor's voice softened. "You're a ghost, Sarah. You don't belong to this world anymore. Walk away while you still can." She raised her gun. "I did walk away from fear, from silence, from men like you." And then the night erupted again. Gunfire cut through the trees. Muzzle flashes strobed through the darkness, painting the snow with bursts of light. Sarah moved with precision born of muscle memory. Every motion was economy, no waste, no panic. Bull covered her flank, his shots deliberate and brutal. Ghost silhouette flashed between trees, his rifle singing in the rhythm of purpose. Diesel's deep voice called targets over comms, each one dropping like punctuation. Victor's men were trained, but they weren't driven. They fought for money. Sarah's people fought for meaning. The difference was night and day. When Victor's last man fell, silence returned again, but this time it was complete. Sarah stepped forward slowly, her breath visible in the cold. Victor lay half buried in snow, clutching his side, pistol still in hand. He coughed, blood staining his teeth. "You think you won, Hendrickx?" Sarah holstered her weapon. "I didn't come here to win." "Then what the hell was this?" She crouched beside him. "Justice." He laughed weakly. "There's no justice, there's just power." She looked at him for a long moment, then quietly. "Then maybe it's time power learned to bleed." He tried to raise the gun, but his strength was gone. The weapon slipped from his fingers and disappeared into the snow. Sarah stood. The wind picked up, carrying his last breath away. By morning, the forest was quiet again. The storm had passed, but the world had changed. Federal agents arrived before noon. Helicopters, SUVs, flashing lights. News crews followed, cameras, headlines, questions shouted into cold air. Sarah watched from a distance as agents cordoned off the site, taking Danny Castellano and Judge Whitmore into custody. The sheriff had already fled. He wouldn't get far. Rebecca approached, phone in hand. "You're all over the news. Half the country calling you a hero. The other half wants to know how a Navy SEAL fell 6,000 feet and lived." Sarah smiled faintly. "Let them wonder." Bull walked up beside her, eyes scanning the ridge. "What happens now?" Sarah looked toward the horizon, where the snow met the sky. "Now," she said softly, "now the world gets to decide what kind of noise truth makes." That evening, as the sun bled orange over the valley, Sarah stood alone by the river, the same one that had tried to claim her. The water moved quietly, deceptively peaceful. She knelt and let her fingers graze its surface, cold, biting, alive. Her reflection looked back, older, scarred but unbroken. She pulled out her father's letter one last time. The edges were soft now, the ink faded from handling. "Finish this, baby girl, for both of us." She smiled through the tears she hadn't let herself shed until now. "It's finished, Dad," she whispered. "We made it loud." The river carried her words downstream, to wherever truth goes when it's finally spoken. Behind her, Bull's voice was low, warm. "You done talking to ghosts?" She turned, smiling faintly. "For now." He nodded. "We've got cleanup to do." Sarah looked at the horizon one last time. "Yeah," she said, "let's go clean up." The world would call her many things after that day: hero, whistleblower, survivor. but she'd never call herself any of them. Because for Sarah Hendrickx, survival wasn't victory. Truth was. And sometimes truth doesn't shout. Sometimes it just refuses to stay buried. Some wars end when the shooting stops. Others linger in the quiet that follows. It had been 3 weeks since the siege in the mountains. 3 weeks since the footage went live. Since Danny Castellano's empire cracked in half, spilling names and faces into the light. And in those 3 weeks, Sarah Hendrickx had learned that justice doesn't move fast, especially when the people it's chasing still have money. She stood in front of a window inside a federal safe house in Helena, Montana. A cold wind rolled down from the hills, scattering old snow and new lies. Her arm was still in a brace, her ribs still wrapped. And her name was everywhere. Every channel, every feed, every headline. The SEAL who exposed a crime ring. The woman who fell and rose again. Hero or vigilante, inside the Bitterroot siege. It was the kind of fame she'd never wanted. The kind that turned survival into spectacle. Behind her, Rebecca paced with her phone pressed to her ear. Yeah, I understand, but you can't edit her words. The full speech stays intact. That was the deal. A pause, then her tone hardened. If your network wants exclusive access, you do it on her terms, or not at all. She hung up and turned towards Sarah. They want you on camera, again. Sarah smiled faintly, to make sure the story sells. To make sure it doesn't fade, Rebecca corrected softly. The public forgets fast. A few more weeks and they'll be chasing the next scandal. You need to stay visible. Sarah looked out at the snow again. I didn't do this to be visible. I know, but the truth you fought for, it needs witnesses. Sarah said nothing. Bull entered the room, carrying 2 mugs of coffee and a face lined with the kind of fatigue you don't sleep off. Agent Mills just called, he said. FBI's got Castellano under heavy guard. He's cutting deals. Whitmore's lawyers screaming for immunity. Sheriff Braddock's still missing. Braddock won't last long, Sarah said quietly. Men like him never do when they run out of someone to serve. Bull handed her the coffee. You should eat something. You've been running on fumes. Sarah took a slow sip. You ever notice how survival always tastes bitter after the fight? Done. Bull leaned against the table. You're not supposed to enjoy it. You're supposed to remember it. 2 days later, the hearings began. A congressional committee, cameras, rows of suits pretending to care. Rebecca sat in the gallery recording everything. Bull sat behind her, silent and watchful. Sarah sat alone at the witness table, under the hot glare of lights and judgment. Her uniform had long been retired, but she still carried herself like she was in one, straight spine, steady gaze, voice unshaken. The chairman cleared his throat. Commander Hendrickx, for the record, you've stated that you conducted an unsanctioned investigation into Summit Aviation's operations. Is that correct? Yes, sir. You were aware that doing so was in violation of federal jurisdiction and, potentially, the Uniform Code of Military Justice. I was aware, she said evenly. Then why proceed? Sarah looked up, meeting his gaze. Because waiting for permission got my father killed. The room fell silent. She continued, her tone calm but razor-edged. Because sometimes, sir, the system you trust to protect you is the same one that buries you. And because I took an oath to defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic. A few murmurs rippled through the room. One of the younger senators shifted uncomfortably. Commander, some have argued your actions bordered on vigilantism. Sarah didn't blink. If telling the truth is vigilantism, then maybe the system needs better definitions. Rebecca smiled faintly in the gallery. Bull just nodded once. That night, after the hearing adjourned, Sarah stood alone on the steps of the Capitol Annex. The city lights reflected off puddles of melting snow, the air heavy with exhaust and exhaustion. A reporter shouted her name. Another shoved a microphone close. "Commander, do you consider yourself a hero?" She paused, looking out at the sea of flashing cameras. "No," she said softly. "Heroes don't get to walk away. I just got lucky." And she walked past them, leaving the word hero behind like an echo she refused to claim. Back at the safe house, Bull found her sitting on the porch again, staring at the dark line of the horizon. "You did good today," he said. "Did I?" "Yeah," he said quietly. "You made them listen." Sarah rubbed her shoulder absently. "Listening isn't justice." "No," Bull agreed, "but it's the first step." She turned to him. "What about you? What happens when this is over?" He smiled faintly. "There's always another storm somewhere. Maybe I'll finally fix that damn Harley. Maybe I won't." Sarah chuckled softly. "You ever stop fighting, Bull?" "Not until they put me under something that doesn't breathe," he said. In the following days, the story exploded. The FBI raided Summit Aviation's headquarters. Federal prosecutors filed charges against multiple officials. And the people who had looked away for years finally started looking back. Miguel and Maria called from Idaho, safe, grateful, alive. Emma sent a message saying her brother had started physical therapy again. For the first time in years, Sarah felt something like peace nibble at the edges of her exhaustion. But peace, for soldiers, is just another form of waiting. A week later, Rebecca found her at a diner just outside Cascade Falls. No cameras, no noise, just bad coffee and quiet. She sat across from Sarah and slid an envelope across the table. "What's this?" "Victor Reeves' autopsy report," Rebecca said. "He didn't die from the gunshot. He bled out trying to crawl back to his truck. Last words were your name." Sarah stared at the paper for a long time before pushing it back. "Then he got what he earned." Rebecca nodded slowly. "You know, you could take the settlement the Bureau offered. They're offering back pay, reinstatement, protection. You'd never have to fight again." Sarah looked at her, a small, tired smile tugging at her mouth. "Protection from what, Rebecca? The world, the truth. I'm not built to hide." Rebecca studied her for a long moment. "Then what are you built for, Sarah?" Sarah looked down at her coffee. "To keep walking until it matters." A bell over the diner door chimed. Diesel and Ghost walked in, both wearing civilian clothes but carrying that same aura of readiness. Ghost grinned. "Heard they're making a movie about you. You want us to play ourselves." Sarah laughed softly. "Only if they get the ending right." "What's the ending?" Diesel asked. Sarah looked out the window, where the sun was breaking through clouds over the mountains. "There isn't one," she said. "Not yet." Bull entered behind them, his voice low and amused. "She's right. Endings are for people who stop." Sarah smiled. "Then we keep moving." That night Sarah drove alone. The road wound along the Bitterroot River, the same water that had almost taken her, now running calm under moonlight. She pulled over at a familiar clearing, the place her father had taught her to shoot, the place his letter had hidden the truth. Snow covered the ground in thin, silver sheets. The air was sharp, clean, full of ghosts that didn't scare her anymore. She knelt and placed a folded piece of paper on the ground, a copy of her father's letter, edges frayed, words softened by time. Then she whispered, "We did it, Dad. The world heard you." A gust of wind lifted the page, carrying it across the clearing. She let it go. Her phone buzzed. A message from Rebecca. "Breaking. Senate committee recommends federal reforms based on Hendrickx findings. President expected to address the case tomorrow." Sarah smiled faintly. "Good, about time." She climbed back into her truck, started the engine, and let the headlights carve a path through the dark. The radio played softly, an old country song about home and promises. She didn't know the lyrics, but they felt like memory. For a brief, flickering moment, she allowed herself to imagine what normal might feel like. Not missions, not headlines, just mornings that didn't start with briefing notes or gunfire. She wondered if she could ever get there. And then, with the faintest smile, decided maybe she didn't need to. Because her father had been right all along. Sometimes the uniform isn't enough. Sometimes justice doesn't come from a badge. Sometimes it comes from people who refuse to stay silent. In Cascade Falls, the hangar where it all began stood empty now. The same place she'd found the forged manifests. The same place her father had once worked. The sign for Summit Aviation was gone. The building stripped to concrete and echoes. Sarah stepped inside one last time. Her footsteps sounded like memories. She touched the wall where her father's name had once been painted on an old locker. Her voice was barely a whisper. This was where it started and where it ends. But even as she said it, she knew better. The world didn't give clean endings, it gave choices. And hers was to keep going. Outside, the snow began again, soft, steady, endless. Sarah looked up, letting the flakes melt on her skin. Somewhere far below, the river murmured. Somewhere far ahead, the horizon waited. She climbed into her truck and started driving toward it. Not toward escape. Toward whatever came next. The road stretched out like a promise, disappearing into white silence. And for the first time in a long time, Sarah didn't look back. How do you live after the mission ends? No orders, no targets, no enemies left to name. Sarah Hendrickx had asked herself that question every day since the hearings ended. Since the noise faded, the cameras packed up, and the headlines began to drift from hero to yesterday's story. The world had moved on. But the echo stayed. It was late spring in Montana. The snow had melted, the rivers ran high again, and the mountains stood quiet, watching eternal. Sarah lived in a small cabin near Glacier Park now. Nothing fancy, just wood, quiet, and distance. She woke with the dawn, made coffee, chopped wood, listened to the wind move through the pines. Her body still carried the memory of war. Her shoulder clicked when she reached too high. Her ribs ached when storms rolled in. But she was learning to exist without purpose carved by violence. Some mornings she missed it, the rhythm of missions, the clarity of danger. But mostly she missed the sound of her father's voice, the calm before the storm when purpose was simple: protect, endure, finish. Now the finish was done. And she was left with herself. Rebecca visited once a month. She always brought new articles, legal updates, sometimes a bottle of wine and a smile that didn't quite hide her fatigue. The president signed the Hendrickx reforms, she said one afternoon, leaning against the porch rail. Federal oversight for private contracts, new whistleblower protections, your name on the bill. Sarah smiled faintly. Guess that makes it real. It makes it matter, Rebecca said softly. Bull dropped by less often. His leg had been acting up, and he joked about being semi-retired, though everyone knew he was still the first call when things got dark. Diesel opened a repair shop in Bozeman. Ghost disappeared into the woods and sent postcards from nowhere. Life, Sarah realized, wasn't about endings. It was about dispersal. The way a mission fractures when it's over, everyone drifting, finding new corners of quiet. That night she sat by the fire with Rebecca, the orange glow painting their faces in warmth and shadow. You ever think about writing a book? Rebecca asked. Sarah laughed softly. What would I even say? Start with the truth. Sarah stared into the flames. The truth's already out there. The world doesn't need my voice repeating it. Rebecca tilted her head. Maybe it's not for the world, maybe it's for you. Sarah looked at her, then away. I spent years fighting to be heard. Now I think I like the silence. Rebecca smiled sadly. Silence can be dangerous too. Not this kind, Sarah said. This kind heals. Weeks passed. Summer came. The cabin's roof creaked in the heat, and the nights were full of crickets instead of gunfire. One morning a letter arrived, handwritten, stamped from Washington. It was from Emma Torres. Commander, it read, my brother, walking again. Not perfectly, but he's walking. He wanted me to tell you thank you for giving him back his belief that good people still exist. We all owe you more than you'll ever admit. Miguel says you're too stubborn to visit, but we're keeping a room ready anyway, just in case. Sarah read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in the box where she kept her father's note. 2 lives, 2 letters. One beginning, one end. That night she dreamed of the fall again. Not the fear, not the impact. Just the silence of the air. The moment between gravity and surrender. The space where she had chosen life instead of letting it end. When she woke, the dream didn't frighten her anymore. It felt like remembering an old song, one that once hurt, but now only reminded you that you survived it. In early July, she received an unexpected visitor. A young recruit from the Navy, barely 20, fresh from basic, showed up at her gate in uniform, nervous as hell. Ma'am, he said, saluting awkwardly, I was told I could find Lieutenant Commander Hendrickx here. Sarah raised an eyebrow. You found her. What's your name, sailor? Petty Officer Marcus Dean, ma'am. My mother, she served with your father, back in the day. She said if I ever started to lose faith in what the uniform meant, I should find you. Sarah studied him for a moment, seeing both her past and her father's reflection in the boy's trembling hands. You still believe in what the uniform stands for? She asked quietly. He hesitated. I want to, but the world makes it hard. Sarah nodded slowly. It always will. He looked down. Then how do you keep believing? She smiled gently. You stop believing in the system and start believing in the people wearing it. The boy blinked, unsure how to respond. Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder. Tell your mother she was right to send you. You'll figure it out. Just remember, courage isn't loud. It's quiet. It's the part of you that keeps standing when no one's watching. He saluted again, this time with conviction. Yes, ma'am. As he walked back down the dirt path, Sarah felt something stir in her chest. Not pride, not nostalgia. Hope. Later that evening, Bull called from Bozeman. Got a message from a friend in D.C., he said. They're reopening investigations in 3 other states, using your files as a template. Sarah smiled softly. Good, maybe that means something changed. Bull chuckled. Don't get poetic on me, Doc. You'll ruin your reputation. Too late, she said and hung up. At dusk, the sky turned the color of embers. Sarah stepped outside, barefoot, the ground warm under her feet. The forest stretched before her, endless, quiet, alive. Somewhere an owl called. Somewhere farther off, thunder rolled. She closed her eyes and listened to everything and nothing. The wind and the trees. The low hum of life returning to balance. The steady, familiar beat of her own heart. She thought of all the people who had carried her through the storm. Bull, Rebecca, Diesel, Ghost, the Torres family. Ordinary people who refused to look away. People who reminded her that even in a world that burns, there are still hands that build. She opened her eyes and whispered to the night. For them, always for them. The following morning, Sarah loaded her truck. Not to run, not to hide. To go. She'd been invited to speak at a veterans rehabilitation center in Wyoming, an outreach program for soldiers learning to live with what they'd done and what they'd lost. She hesitated before accepting, but Bull had convinced her. They need to see what survival looks like, he'd said. Not perfect, just real. So she packed light, her jacket, her father's letter, a photograph of the cabin crew after the siege. And one last thing, a worn Navy trident dull with age, edges smooth from years of wear. She pinned it inside her jacket pocket. Not as a title, as a memory. When she arrived, the hall was small, filled with quiet faces that understood more than words ever could. She stood at the podium, cleared her throat, and began without notes. "I used to think survival was the goal," she said. "That if I could just make it through the next mission, the next fight, the next day, that would be enough. But it is." She paused, scanning the room. Survival isn't victory. It's the beginning. It's the part where you have to choose who you're going to be when the war ends. A few heads nodded. One man wiped his eyes. "I fell 6,000 feet," she continued softly. "And when I hit the ground, I thought I'd lost everything. But the truth is, I'd been falling long before that. The fall just made me see it." Silence filled the room, not empty but alive. "I don't know what peace looks like," she said, "but I know what dignity feels like. And it doesn't need applause, it doesn't need medals, it just needs action. Quiet, simple, human action." Her voice lowered, the rhythm steady as a heartbeat. "So if you're sitting here wondering whether what you did or what you lost defines you, it doesn't. What defines you is what you do after, when no one's watching, when no one's clapping." She looked down, smiling faintly. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." The room stayed silent, then rose in applause, not loud, not wild, just steady. Grateful human. And for the first time, Sarah didn't deflect it. She accepted it, not as praise, but as proof that something in the world had shifted. That night she walked outside into the Wyoming dusk. The sky was streaked with the last light of day, wide and endless. She took a deep breath, the kind that feels like a prayer. The horizon was still waiting. But this time, she wasn't running toward it. She was walking with it. Slow, steady, free. Because for the first time in a long time, Sarah Hendrickx wasn't defined by who she'd fought or what she'd lost. She was defined by what she'd kept. Her will. Her dignity. Her silence, when it spoke louder than any war. And somewhere, far beyond the sound of rivers and wind, her father's voice lingered. "Proud of you, baby girl." She smiled through the quiet. "Yeah, Dad," she whispered, "me too."